We have another question from our listeners through the internet. Please, Shane.
Michael says, the President announced that drilling was to be stopped on the 33 exploratory wells that are also in progress. What safety precautions will be in place to keep these holes under control? It seems that it would be safer to continue on drilling since there are people on site keeping an eye on well control. One can be assured that these personnel are paying the utmost attention. Having to depend on unsupervised or at best remotely supervised equipment with no one on hand to deal directly with any upset is not as comforting a thought.
I'm not sure if I think there are people on those rigs. They may have just been stopped. But I think the question you're probably getting at, and that is one that we're going to have to learn because it's a very, very important question to discover. Basically, what caused this in the first place? And you have three choices, or three possibilities. One is a technological failure, where basically the design of the equipment was either inadequate or not adequate for the depths it was being used in, some technological failure. There is, of course, the human mistakes, perhaps inattention to maintenance that has been come up. So those type of things are a combination of those three things. The cautious thing to do is to stop those activities right now, because if it is a technological failure, then all of those wells, all using the same basic technology, are at risk. If it was a human fault or a combination, then we need to discover that too. So the caution at this point is to stop that activity until that is discovered, and I think that was the basis of that decision. I don't know if anyone has other additions.
Well, one particularly unusual thing that happened in this site is that there were these methyl hydrate crystals, and this has not been encountered in most other drilling sites. This is hydrated methane. These look actually like large water balloons. It's methane mixed with water to form a crystalline lattice. And when these are destabilized by changes in pressure or temperature, well, then they release the gas. And it's thought that this is what happened with this particular blowout, that the setting of the concrete collar increased heat and caused a rapid release of gas. And this was the gas that shot up and caused the initial damage. This doesn't occur everywhere. Yes, I think that the power of nature was pointed out to us again by this oil well, and how little control we have over some of these forces once we let them out of the bottle, so to speak. And I question whether or not we should be trying to tap into these until we have good mechanisms of coping with them, and we're certainly being tested now.
One of the, before we go into, we've been talking a lot here about the biology and technology and those types of things, but I want to, before we go to other questions that we have here, I want to ask a question about the Oscars for a second, and that is an issue of, as he talked about, ecosystem services. As he mentioned in his summary, one of the biggest economic impacts from all this, beyond the commercial and recreational fishing aspects that most of us are familiar with, was a loss of ecosystem services. So but I think it's very important when it will be more so as this spill spreads. Because even if they're fortunate to stop what's going on now, we still have some 40 days or so of oil out of the water that's going to come ashore, and it is coming ashore in different places. And so they're going to be affecting over a long term this idea of ecosystem services. So I'd like for him to give a little bit more of an explanation on that.
Well, I can tell you that, it's going to be a long process for us to find out what the economic impacts will be as they relate to the services. One thing that I have heard from the General Counsel for NOAA is that in the damage assessment process, or NERDA, Natural Resource Damage Assessment process, ecosystem services, the value of the services that we get from our natural environment will be part of that damage assessment process. So that's a big step forward. And as I had mentioned just a moment ago in my opening comments, is that in a lot of cases, the services that we receive from our natural environment outweigh the marketed services that we typically think of, such as commercial, recreational fisheries and tourism. So what I think that might mean in the long run is larger bill that somebody's going to be paying.
We have a question from our audience, please.
Yes, I recently heard on Jon Stewart that they were, I guess the oil people had found a lot of ways to get the oil, but no way of how to contain it if it ever spilled. Can you explain why this is basically a lab experiment in the Gulf? I mean, if you could try to contain this, I mean, how come there's barely trying these new things, and how can that's been tested? Can you elaborate?
I think it's a very good question, basically, is why is it? And that is, I think you hit it exactly on the point. Just about everything that we're doing, as we talk about using dispersants to create depth, dealing with all these issues as we are and not doing well at it, has been basically experimental. I see the pants, I think one government administrator called it. And that's a problem for all of us, because this is something that we should have anticipated, that not the industry, but our regulators should have looked at it. And I'm part of that. All of us that deal with the situation are part of that concern. I served on a federal advisory panel in 2007, which was an advisory panel on ultra-deep exploration, which I thought was one of the best names for an advisory panel I was ever on. But the whole party was not looking at oil and gas development in 5,000 feet of water, but at 10,000 feet of water. And so a couple of us that had the concerns about environmental issues were raising them then, but the overwhelming push of the committee and direction was, how do we develop better technologies to get even deeper? And so I think one thing we've learned is that we have failed to anticipate the needs of dealing with oil and gas in these depths, that we became complacent with the safety records in the continental shelf areas, which has been very good, and it has not translated as we believe it would. So I'm not giving you a good answer. There's no good answer. There's frankly no excuse.
It's interesting. Again, I started working back when they first built the pipeline in Alaska. And we have what's called an environmental studies budget in the United States for these sorts of issues. But a whole bunch of things have happened in the last 35 years. One, of course, is the industry started in shallow water, and this deep water work is all relatively recent. It's really only since the mid-90s and the late 90s that wells have even gone into production. So the bottom line is, it's all relatively new technology. And one of the things they did is they essentially took the shallow water playbook and just moved it to the deep sea without probably enough study and thinking about, well, what's going to be different? And so, but that's certainly a concern of mine. And then the other thing that has happened is, this deep sea drilling is really only a Gulf of Mexico phenomenon. This is not what's going on in the Gulf of Alaska or in California. The other two areas where we have offshore oil and gas development. And yet, even though something like 90%, I think it's 96 or 97% of all the offshore oil and gas comes from the Gulf of Mexico. Now, you would think that and now, of course, the big challenge is a new frontier, the deep sea. You would think that we would have spent a lot of money to try and figure out, well, don't we need to understand what's different? And I can tell you that for the most part that hasn't happened. And considering that 96% of the oil and gas is coming from the Gulf of Mexico, you would think a large part of the environmental studies budget would be spent in the Gulf of Mexico. I can tell you that's not true either. It's roughly about only a third of it. So even though the other states don't have as much at risk, we don't have some of the issues we have, we don't seem to be getting the resources. So the bottom line is that, I think we failed to do a whole